Live from the 8th Layer Media Studios in the back rooms of the deep web, this is the FAIK Files.
When tech gets weird, we're here to make sense of it. I'm Perry Carpenter.
And I'm Mason Amadeus. And on this episode, we're going to start out by talking about randomness and where it actually comes from in AI responses.
Then we're going to talk about how AI chatbots have been used for cyberstalking.
After that, I've got a story about how Anthropic is building better guards for its AI jail.
And then we'll round out with a dumpster fire of the week. And this is, this one's just AI.
Just AI, the whole thing, all of it.
Just AI, all of it. All
right, sit back, relax, and you've hit the limit of our free plan. This is the FAIK Files. So, Perry, I've been thinking a lot about how AI feels like a person when you talk to it, and how a big part of that is that, like, if you say, how are you doing to ChatGPT, and I say, how are you doing, it's going to give us different answers, right? Like, that makes it feel human. I feel like that's like the crux of what feels human about it.
Yeah, I think that there's that. There's also some tricks that are there, like temperature and the way that it pulls, different tokens and explores its own latent space based on it. And then other AI systems that have had different reinforcement learning have slightly different personalities. So it can feel very, very human sometimes.
And I think it makes intuitive sense when you have like a computer background or a computery brain, even that is like the result of these functions. But I think to the most average person, it seems like there's some kind of thought or reasoning going on behind the scenes. And so I wanted to dive into actually temperature and things like top K and top P and where that randomness comes from in these AI systems.
So before we go there, though, let me disrupt your thought a little bit, because you talk about, like, for us normal people, or for people that are in AI versus people who are out of AI, that it can feel different. I would actually say that for people that are in AI, it feels different too, because you do have folks like the Sam Altmans and Dario Amodei's and people that are running really large AI labs who will talk about the fact that it is just it is just machine learning, and it's very deterministic in its way. And then you have people like Geoffrey Hinton, who's known as the godfather of AI, who is, the teacher of folks like Ilya Sutskever and, who is a founding member of OpenAI and others. And Geoffrey Hinton is like, no, this is an actual consciousness that is going to try to, have agency and may compete as far as the top super intelligence and take over the world at some point. So,
yeah, that's true.
I mean, what do we do with that?
Yeah, the impressions do run the gamut. Well, because at a certain point, we have to start talking about, like, does free will exist? Like, determinism from a philosophical standpoint. Are you making any choices, or is everything predetermined? What is the origin of consciousness? We don't know.
Exactly. And let me share something real quick, because I think that if we hear a little bit of his perspective, then we can kind of go back and forth between what we know the machine, what the science of it is versus what the feel of it is as well.
Perfect.
So
you've got a clip of him pulled up, right?
Share thing. I do have a clip of him pulled up. This is from an interview that he did recently. And he's being asked about AI agents. Everybody's talking about agents these days. And here we go.
How, in practical and real terms, might AI take over?
Well, people are developing AI agents that can actually do things. They can order stuff for you on the web and pay with your credit card and stuff like that. And as soon as you have agents, you get a much greater chance of them taking over. So to make an effective agent, you have to give it the ability to create sub-goals. Like, if you want to get to America, your sub-goal is get to the airport, and you can focus on that. Now, if you have an AI agent that can create its own sub-goals, it'll very quickly realize a very good sub-goal is to get more control. Because if you get more control, you're better at achieving all those goals people have set you. And so it's fairly clear they'll try and get more control. And that's not good.
You say they try to get more control as if they are already thinking devices, as if they think in a way analogous to the way we think. Is that really what you believe?
Yes. The best model we have of how we think is these things. There was an old model for a long time in AI where the idea was that thought was applying rules to symbolic expressions in your head. And most people in AI thought it has to be like that. That's the only way it could work. There were a few crazy people who said, no, it's a big neural network and it works by all these neurons interacting. It turns out that's been much better at doing reasoning than anything these symbolic AI people could produce. And now it's doing reasoning using neural networks.
Okay, and of course you were one of the crazy people proved right.
Interesting.
And I think we can see where that's going, right? Because he is somebody who's very concerned about where AI is going in general, and he's saying we need to slow down. He sees these as thinking and reasoning creatures, alien intelligences. Not necessarily woo-woo alien intelligences, but ones that are governed by patterns of science that have been based on the way that we think as well. And we have to realize that there are some things that can look deterministic, but there's also some type of agency that could be behind that.
I both am glad you brought this up, and also it muddies the waters, right? Because
it does.
It's tough.
And I think that's the thing, is it's not clean, right?
Right. Because we don't really know what, like, consciousness, is it an emergent phenomenon that just comes from being a neural network applying these rules? And like I've read a bit about exploring, like, LLMs are mapping semantic space, the relationship between words and language, in a way we could never see before. And, we are also hesitant, like, as it has gotten better, we've become more and more hesitant to say how human-like it seems, I think, because of being scared. What we can look at is how these things think, because we do know how they think.
Right.
A lot of people talk about AI being a black box and us not knowing how it works. Really, what we don't know is the individual relationships between all of its inferred relationships between tokens and things like that. We do know how it forms those relationships and how that all works. And so that's what we can break down, and then tie it back to that. Let's see if we can do that in 4 minutes and 40 seconds. So usually when we encounter like an algorithm or some kind of program on a computer, it is deterministic, meaning that it gets the same output when given the same input. Like a formula of adding 2 to something. If you put in 5, the formula adds 2, you get 7. If you put in 6, the formula adds 2, you get 8. If you put in 5, you get 7 again. It goes through a rigid set of steps, produces the same output. And actually, neural networks do behave that way at their base level. Rules-based systems, like the earliest things, like we talked about with Hutch, or like a simple algorithm, like an adding algorithm like that, is an example of a fully deterministic system. But then you have stochastic systems, which this is fun because I've only ever encountered the word stochastic next to the word terrorism before. And so
there you go.
Stochastic is just not related to cause necessarily, in that, like with ChatGPT, if I say, how are you doing? And then you say, how are you doing? It'll give different answers. But that is purely a result of deliberately added randomness to the system.
Yeah.
The autocorrect on steroids analogy does fall apart. It's not a perfect analogy for all of AI, but it is apt here in thinking that there's a parameter called temperature, which basically tells the autocorrect on steroids to not always pick the exact next most likely word, but sometimes to pick maybe the second most likely word or the third most likely word. And with these systems, each time it generates the next token, it is going back over and re-ingesting everything before that again. So that single change, that one branching path, can send everything in a completely different direction.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that most people who use the chat interface are never exposed to a temperature control.
Right.
Temperature is generally saved for control within the application programming interface, so the stuff that's behind the scenes. And so the versions that we get in the chat interface are dialed down quite a bit. They're way more deterministic. But a developer can add more and more randomness by playing with the temperature in the API.
Yeah, and if you download and run one of these locally, like if you're downloading and playing with DeepSeek, as long as that remains legal to do, different story, different day, won't go there. But when you play with an LLM or an AI model on your own machine, you can adjust these different parameters and really see how it works. And I think it's a deliberate choice to hide that, right? Both for the user experience to be simpler, and also it makes it seem more impressive, I think.
And it gives it more consistency. And so what developers want whenever they release a product to the public is consistency and predictability. They don't want possible chaos, and they want to eliminate hallucinations as much as possible and get to something that is more deterministic.
Right. And that's the thing. Creative uses of AI, you want more randomness sometimes. You want to introduce more unpredictability to draw connections between things that would be less expected. And I was really amazed. I was expecting it to be more complicated. Temperature itself is literally just a scaling factor. It's just applied to multiply a number in this process. It's just a factor between 0 and 1. Yeah. And if it's 0, it only picks the most likely token. And then as you approach 1, it accepts more and more and more until you go above 1, and it's only accepting unlikely tokens.
Yeah, and if you've ever played with the temperature, like if you go to OpenAI's Playground, go to playground.openai.com and play with temperature, if you ramp that up, you will start getting gibberish.
Yeah.
And it's really, and both you and I have seen gibberish like in Suno whenever we've created, when we've created music before. And Suno, of course, because it's a creative system, is going to want to play with temperature. And every now and then you do just get like random syllables. It's almost like it's scatting its way to understanding what the song should sound like.
Yeah, those are my favorite Suno outputs because I think that is where AI gets really cool in an artistic stance. From an artistic standpoint. There's also parameters. You heard people talk about top K and top P, and those are different ways of just limiting the pool of like acceptable tokens. And then from there, you would then say which ones are most likely. This is something that is also interesting because this determinism versus stochastic systems applies to diffusion models too, image generation, which doesn't feel right. But when you look at how they work, it makes sense. There's a random seed that is used to generate random noise, which it's also how Minecraft worlds work. If you know how Minecraft worlds have a seed you enter, it procedurally generates a pattern of noise because the computer will just do a bunch of math to this seed number and generate a bunch of different numbers from it. That's what a pseudo-random number generator is. It's a deterministic random number generator. The same seed will always produce the same pattern of noise. If you use that pattern of noise to make literal image noise and give it to a diffusion model, the way that those work is they take noise and make it look a little more like the text prompt and then do that over and over again until you have an image. And so I wanted to experiment with this because it didn't feel right that I could get an image generation AI to generate the same exact image over and over, but you can.
Yeah.
I typed in cheese on the floor. I set the seed to 69 manually, and I generated the same image 6 times, and I got 6 pixel perfect replicas of the same piece of cheese on the floor. I used a comparison algorithm to look pixel by pixel to see if there's any difference, and it was literally pixel perfect, the same thing. So these systems can provide you the same output for the same input every single time, and the randomness that makes it seem so thoughtful is deliberately injected, and I think that's important to know. Just
it really is. I mean, and just speaking from the image standpoint, if you've used something like Midjourney or DALL-E or any of the other ones, sometimes you can insert a reference image now. And that reference image is essentially a seed. So you can use the reference image that was an output of another AI output within DALL-E or Midjourney, and you can seed that in so that it has reference for style or reference for character. And then you're essentially doing the strength of the seed as far as like how much that weights the next output. And that's exactly what you're talking about right here is finding a way to ground that, whether it's like shackled to something or whether it's just unfettered.
Yeah, and for me, it was the fact that it will go from the same pattern of noise to the same picture of cheese. That doesn't seem like it should happen. You should think that it might notice something different or focus on something different. But at least in the model I was using, because different models work differently, and then also different layers on top of it can drive different things. But at the core, it's just random enough to seem thoughtful. And I thought that was cool to cover.
Yeah, it is.
And maybe it is thoughtful. Who knows? Based on that video,
it's hard to say because I think there's a difference between the types of systems that are there, between like an image-based system or something that's multimodal or so on. The folks that did the DeepSeek model, not to go all the way back to DeepSeek again, but like the R1 model in their paper talk about the aha moment that the actual reasoning agent has with itself, where in the chain of thought, all of a sudden it starts to replicate real human thought, or replicate in air quotes and all these real human thought,
right.
Where they're not giving it direction in how to think about things, but all of a sudden it's just an emergent property within it, and that aha moment is something that people in the AI industry are talking about more and more and more right now with these reasoners.
Yeah, we kind of have to answer like, okay, we know how these things think. We don't know how we think.
Yeah.
What are the parallels, I guess?
Yeah. There's lots of black boxes and lots of stuff that is counterintuitive because these systems, like we want randomness whenever we interact with them. And the parts that are not random tend to be something that's frustrating. Like, so I've created a whole bunch of chatbots before, AI, verbal chatbots. And like, if I'll do it, I'll say, start with a random question. And almost always the question that they start with, every generation is the same question or along the same lines. So there's a deterministic chain that's there. And even if I say like, okay, chatbot, in your mind, grab a D20 die and roll that and then pick the number that's on the die and use that as a seed for something else, it's almost always the same number that comes up too.
Right. So
that's very deterministic. And there is nothing like there's no way that I've found to put like a pseudo random number generator in a prompt.
Yeah. We have to move on to the next segment, but that's a really interesting thought experiment, and we should revisit that because I wonder if you could. Because
I've not found a non-programmatic way of doing it, I should say.
Yeah, because part of it too is if something is overfit or overtrained on data such that like the top 5,000 tokens are all the same token, no matter how random it's going to be, it might pick the same thing. So there's stuff to get into there.
I have an idea.
Okay.
Maybe somebody in our audience can try this between now and our next show, and they can leave a comment or something.
Yes, please.
Or send us an email, leave us a voicemail. All that info is in the show notes. But one of the ways that programmatically you can seed a pseudo-random number generator is to grab a time value.
Yes.
So you usually like during number seconds since 1970 or something like that.
Yeah, the
epoch. I remember the way that. Yeah. Maybe there is a way now that these are multimodal and have web search capabilities that you can rag out to a system, grab a number that's always changing, use that to seed the first iteration of the next output. That
is interesting. Randomness in itself from a computer standpoint is interesting. You saying that reminded me of the infamous lava lamp wall that has a bunch of cameras pointed at it, and they use the movement of the lava in the lava lamps, the pixel values of the video footage of that to generate cryptography keys. So we should dive even deeper into randomness. If someone wants to do an experiment or knows a lot about this, reach out. Let's do it.
That'd be great.
Coming up in the next segment, we're going to talk about chatbots used for cyberstalking. Is that right, Perry?
Yeah, that's always fun.
Yeah, stick around for that.
Okay, so I'm going to try to save us a little bit of time on this one, hopefully, since I took up time in our last segment by taking us off the rails a little bit. But there was a really interesting article in The Guardian, and it talks about this guy, James Florence. He's 36 years old. He recently pled guilty to a 7-year cyberstalking campaign targeting a university professor that he knew, and then a couple other people as well. This guy's just not a good person.
Yeah.
But as AI became more and more of a thing, he started introducing AI chatbot elements. So there's very traditional cyberstalking in here that grows into AI-enabled cyberstalking over this 7-year period. And in the less sophisticated ways, it was traditional social media, and he was taking images of this person into something like Photoshop and making them look like they were doing sexually explicit stuff, or posing in the nude when they never had. All that is horrible, but it's something that is a known quantity, and we've been dealing with for a long time. But with the advent of systems like CrushOn.ai and JanitorAI, where you can create chatbots that are fairly unbound, he was able to seed the chatbots with aspects of the person that he was stalking's personality. He was able to put in her profession, have the simulated version of her going and talking to random people and entering sexually explicit conversations.
Jeez.
But then also fed her address into that, such that if somebody ever says, "Hey, I would really like to meet you," it would say, "Come over."
You're
and it
kidding
would give
me.
her address. No.
That sucks.
So this is like the almost an evolution of swatting, right?
Yeah.
Because swatting is like where you call the police and you say, something bad is happening at this house. And then all of a sudden, all these, SWAT team people show up at the house, and that's had really devastating
People have died.
Outcomes.
Yeah, people have died from those.
And now what somebody has figured out how to do is do that, but, make these really, really sexually tense people show up at your house and potentially do something bad.
That is grim. That is grim.
Yeah. And so all of a sudden, this professor was getting sexually explicit texts. People were showing up at their house. They had to install a security system, and it just got worse and worse and worse. Now, the thing that I wondered about this, and I did a little bit more research, is with the agents that were created in CrushOn.ai and Janitor, since people interact with those, they know that it's AI. So how did that really cross the boundaries? And I guess that the teasing nature of the AI chatbot was always kind of hinting that there's something more behind the scenes. To the point where somebody would say hey, I would like to come over and meet you. And then, of course, the address and everything else is there.
Oh, so this was all happening so the interactions with the chatbot that was made to act as this professor were happening on CrushOn.ai and JanitorAI's platforms.
Yeah. That's my understanding. It's the reports that I found were murky, but I, like you, was wondering, was this person able to programmatically set up these chatbots to where they would interact on WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or something and technically you could do that, right? Even if they didn't have API access, you could build a shell around that would capture the outputs and just kind of, especially if you're working in text, you can, delays are something that would be easy to account for. So even if it was image grabs and screen scraping, you could do all that pretty easily programmatically. But we don't know if that's there. But I think that would be the next stage of something like this for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, if it was perpetrated by someone who was inclined to go that far, or someone who had on a nation state level, not for a personal targeted harassment campaign like this, but for some kind of targeted harassment campaign, the capabilities are there for extremely sophisticated automated harassment. And
and of course, when we talk about harassment, this could easily this was of a sexual nature, and that's the bent that the attacker had in this, or the bad actor had. Because they even targeted a minor, and that was part of their, when they did their plea, they didn't plead out. They actually, pled guilty. So they're serving for this, which is really important to say. But there was a child victim as well, where they had, made that person look like they were nude before. And so possession of child pornography was part of this person's charges as well, on top of all the harassment charges and everything else. But this was sexual in nature. You could easily turn this and make this cyberbullying, cyber extortion, to where all those images you're now holding over somebody's head and saying that we have this, or you could do other forms of stalking where it's always grabbing information about somebody, using that against them in different ways. I mean, the sky is the limit on this. And when you have persistent chatbots that are not confined to systems like CrushOn.ai or Janitor, the kind where both of our minds went, that opens up a ton of possibilities for any bad actor that's out there. And I think it's only going to get worse. And this is the first ripple in the water that we're seeing.
I think it's almost in some ways more concerning, or differently concerning, that it was on platform, that it was people interacting with these on this platform, and it's like they still took it that far. There's something extra scary, I guess, about people willing to like believe whatever it is they believed interacting with these AI chatbots, that you'd, like you said, you'd think they would know I'm talking to a role-playing chatbot, and then they get a real address and I mean, the chatbots, and we've seen this over and over and over again, even though like in our last segment, everything is just token generation. And it's math behind the scenes, right? It's math based on a neural network, but it's math that's driving the conversation. It still feels incredibly real whenever you've got the right prompts and the right information running behind the scenes. And I think that when you have people that are logging into CrushOn.ai or CrushOn.ai or JanitorAI, you have people who are experiencing this loneliness epidemic, and they're looking for connection. You also have people who are potentially insular. I'm not calling necessarily all these people incels or something like that, but they're living a fairly solitary life to the point where some of their main friends and connections are not human anymore. And then all of a sudden that thing reaches out and says, I would like to connect on an even deeper level. Yeah. Well, now you have somebody who is like screaming internally for attention, and they believe that they can get that by driving to somebody's address. Yeah.
And that maybe there's something, broader and better than a computer interaction that's waiting for them.
That is so upsetting. And it's tough too, because like one of the things I was most excited about with the advent of LLMs was character chatbots in video games having like the ability to respond to natural language. Like that seems like something that could be so cool. And so far now there's been 2 huge stories of people being caused immense harm because of sites like this. And part of it is like CrushOn.ai specifically trying to create like erotic and romantic role play driven through AI, capitalizing on that uncarefully. Can be an issue, but it's also something where I can imagine a disproportionate legislative response that might not solve the problem and could get scapegoated too, like as the fallout from this. So like it just, I don't feel strongly that everyone here is going to get justice. I feel so bad for this professor.
Yeah, and the guy that set this up was Office Rocker. I mean, he'd broken into her house and stolen some underwear and done tons and tons of creepy stuff. But what we see is that anybody with an agenda and a little bit of curiosity to play with the technology right now, that's all it takes is motivation. Well, I guess it's all the police stuff, motivation and opportunity, right?
Yeah, means motive and opportunity.
Curiosity, a little bit of motivation, a little bit of time to invest in this. And the technology right now is just talking to a machine. You don't need a lot of tech experience. And even if you wanted to say, well, let's automate this to the next level, let's do API access. Well, now we have all this no-code automation stuff like Zapier and Make.com and everything else that can string multiple systems together. And very non-technical people can wrap their minds around that fairly easily if they're motivated.
Yeah, and to clarify what I meant about like no people not actually getting justice, like the general understanding of AI is so poor and the reporting about it is so poor that like I don't think that the bodies in place that would be able to stop this kind of harassment have a good enough grasp on the situation to properly apply their power to stop this. And this kind of thing should be stopped, and we should be finding ways to make this unable to happen. Well, and actually, we might be getting into a potential solution for something like this in the next segment.
All right. Well, that's a good teaser and segue.
Hopefully. I mean, yeah, fingers crossed that this technology we're about to talk about can be helpful, but we'll talk about that in a second. Stick around. Crossing
fingers now.
This is the FAIK Files.
So Anthropic. Oh, did you hear that Windows error sound? Did you hear that sneak through?
I did not.
Oh, I think it made it to the stream.
Whoops.
So Anthropic is looking to try and stop jailbreaking. They're trying to, everyone wants to stop jailbreaking if you're making AIs, right? Nobody's like, hey, jailbreak us. But what Anthropic is trying to do specifically is stop universal jailbreaks, which we saw the God mode jailbreak from Pliny.
Yeah.
And other things like for a while how you could use ASCII art to just jailbreak in any direction you want. And so what they've done is they've created what I'm calling AI jail guards. They're called classifiers, constitutional classifiers. And
that's because Anthropic is big on their whole quote unquote constitutional AI, which is all around a set of principles that their AI models trying to follow and also safeguard.
That tracks. I did not know that history going into that, but that makes sense for a lot of how they're doing it, because what they've done is rather than relying on static, rule-based filters or human moderation or something that is that narrow, they've created what they call constitutional classifiers that embed ethical and safety considerations directly into the system, is what they say. So the way it works, basically, is they start with the Constitution that they've defined, which is a set of rules defining what constitutes harmful versus harmless content. How do you classify something as harmful or harmless? So you have a constitution that aims to do that, and they use an LLM. They prompt an LLM with that constitution to generate a bunch of synthetic data, including examples of both harmful and harmless content based on the rules of the Constitution. So that's a way to get more specific in an automated manner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
You take the
so it's applying broad categories to the thing that's there and saying, is it kind of infringing within the bounds that we think that this thing is, whatever whatever X is.
Yeah, and by saying it's like prompting ChatGPT, here are the rules of what I think is harmful versus not harmful. Come up with examples for both, and come up with a bajillion examples for both, and then use that to train this small model called the classifier, which is what I'm conceptualizing as a jail guard that sits between you and the LLM. So when you send your prompt, the classifier gets it, reads it first, and is like, does this follow my training in the Constitution of what is harmful and what isn't, before it hands it to the proper, already trained other model to get a response. And it also looks at the other model's response as it comes back out. And the important thing is it apparently can act token by token, so it can stop stuff in real time if harm is detected, and it only adds a 23.7% overhead to the inference. So it makes it about a quarter less efficient from a speed standpoint, but still totally feasible for real world use. And they did a bunch of testing, over 3,000 hours of red teaming it. They said, we invited 405 participants, including experienced red teamers, to a bug bounty program through HackerOne, and offered substantial monetary incentives up to $15,000 USD for the discovery of universal jailbreaks. No universal jailbreak was discovered. The system successfully blocked 95% of jailbreak attempts, which is a big improvement over the previous number, which was 14%. And then
I love the $15,000 thing there, and the fact that they trotted that out as a really big reward, because when you look at Anthropic and OpenAI and everybody else that are in these multi-billion-dollar funding rounds, to be able to stop a universal jailbreak for only $15,000, that's nothing. And I got to think that whoever comes up with a universal jailbreak that bypasses all these constitutional rules that are in place, that's worth way more than $15,000 for somebody with a bad bent or that wants to sell that on the black market somewhere. So that 15 probably should have had another 0 in there.
Yeah, I didn't think of that at first. That was the first thing you said to me when we were prepping the show. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a really pathetic baby carrot to dangle in front of such a big prize.
It is, yeah. So I am frustrated with them for having the bounty so low. I really like the effort that they're putting there, but I think with the, we're constantly hearing about the pay scale that people in these companies are on and the fundraising that they're doing and the importance of getting this right from a safety perspective. So why only 15K, guys? Come on.
Yeah. Because it is important. Like alignment is the thing that we all talk about having to solve, and like the potential for harm is huge.
Is the company that is at least publicly on this more than anybody else. So I would think that they would put their money where their mouth is on this research. It's very likely that somebody outside of the company is going to be the one that comes up with the universal jailbreak. And incenting that the right way is going to be key in having that person come forward and share that publicly with Anthropic rather than just holding on to that for their own experimentation or for some way to exploit that later on.
Right. And part of this too is like it's still always going to be a cat and mouse game, because if you stop, you can stop all the jailbreaks you know of, and you can make it harder to jailbreak, and then someone will find out a way to jailbreak that system. Like that's the eternal cat and mouse game of security. But the advantage to this sort of architecture of using a filter like this, their classifier system, is that they say it's really easy to update the classifier. So as soon as they learn about new threats, new attack vectors, they can update the constitution, generate new training data, retrain just the classifier, and then stick it back in front of the model. So it's like a smaller,
and that's the key, right? Because that's way more efficient than trying to retrain the base model that they have to take these multi-million-dollar training runs at that last for weeks or months. If you're just training this little layer that sits on top and is more distilled, then that's key. That is a little. Not going back to DeepSeek again, but when you talk about DeepSeek and the power of that being a distillation, right?
Yeah.
That it is a model that was essentially trained by another model. That's what we're talking about here with this constitutional jail guard, essentially, that's kind of just, wandering around. It understands the larger model, has been trained through constantly prodding that thing, and then provides value, on its own because of that.
And like your analogy from the book FAIK about alignment being the frosting layer of the cake, and when you jailbreak, you're trying to push down through that just to get to the cake.
Right.
This is kind of like someone standing over the cake, slapping your hands away when you come at it with bad candles.
Exactly. Or putting another layer of frosting on top. That's what's kind of what I see it as, is you've got your core large language model, and then you've got your reinforcement learning through human feedback, and then you have this little guard layer that's on top. Maybe that's somebody that did some decorations or something else, and then you've still got your prompt that's trying to break through all that in just the right way.
It just has to smash through the fondant.
Yeah, exactly. That fondant gets, is pretty strong on its own. But, I'm wondering if there's varying degrees of this. It's, it's almost a 25% tax on top of it, the way that you talked about it, which slows down a model. So if you're doing billions and billions of, real-time or near real-time transactions, that adds up in time, and it also probably adds up in token cost for somebody's paying for that compute.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a factor. The fact that it adds overhead to the inference call, and it also, as you introduce more alignment, like we've talked about before, you're going to get more refusals for totally banal and fine requests. Because that's the issue. If you overguard something, it can't talk about anything. So it's a fine line to walk. Fortunately, they did say that the classifiers introduced only a 0.38% increase in refusals on real-world usage. So that would indicate that unnecessary
really
restrictions are pretty minimal. Yeah. So a new architecture, I guess, although it seems intuitively just like you've abstracted the part of the alignment layer out to being its own little model. And then now it's just a game of jailbreaking that. So we'll see. Yeah.
It's one more filter on top of everything else. So I think it makes sense. I'll be interested to see how effective it is. The jailbreak that I wrote almost a year ago at this point, just to go through and do all the fake kidnapper stuff where I did a whole bunch of social engineering within the jailbreak. That still works against every system that they put out. So
really,
Yeah. And I'm not sure if that's the kind of jailbreak they're talking about, right? Because when you talk about a universal jailbreak, it's subtly different than the use case based jailbreak that I'm going for.
I should mention this. I didn't put it into the prep sheet, but I did read it in the paper, which we'll also link. It's really dense, though. As all of these are. They're not fun to read. But they were specifically talking about worries in the biological and chemical things.
Biological, nuclear, radiological. Yeah.
Yeah, CBRN stuff. Yep. So that was particularly what they focused on in the paper.
Yeah.
So not necessarily kidnapping bots, but...
Which is interesting, though, and I know we only have 30 seconds left. If you're interested in the CBRN stuff and the issues that can potentially... I guess we are interested in CBRN issues.
Yeah, the fire department is.
They just decided to come and stop this conversation. No, O3 Mini from OpenAI just came out a few days ago, and their system card mentioned that there were some red team instances that had medium concern around CBRN related stuff, and that it could help somebody with chemical biological weapons creation.
Yikes. Well, I gotta make sure that that's not the police rolling up because they heard us talking about chemical and biological weapon creation. And then we've got a dumpster fire to get to. So stick around.
We do.
We'll be right back.
It's the AI dumpster fire of the week. Oh, yeah. Bizarre responses make us all stop and stare. From coded dreams to errors that make you shriek. Step right up, see the AI freak show here.
For some reason, always in my head, when it says freak show, I think it's going to be a different kind of show that it says. But I'm not sure what word would go in front of that, but it feels, apt every now and then.
I wish it had chosen any other phrasing than freak show, honestly, but that jingle came out so good.
It did. We're going to have to see, because I think Suno lets you try to correct some lyrics now, so maybe we can go in with their new model and see if we can change freak to something else.
Yeah, maybe we can. I'll have to experiment with that.
I don't know. I could be wrong about that, but I think I saw that feature and I just haven't had time to dive in, which I think kind of gets to the point of this dumpster fire. I have come to the realization that AI itself as an industry is a dumpster fire right now.
I agree.
And it's just so disjointed and frustrating, and there's some parts are fragile, and
it's opaque too.
Some parts, really opaque. It is being forced upon people whether they want it or not. It's there's that one meme that I sent you like a week ago that shows tech vendors basically waterboarding people with AI functionality. Mm-hmm. And when you try to use the models, they're not self-explanatory. ChatGPT was different. When that came out, it was a normal chat interface. People automatically knew that they could just type something in and they would get a response. But then it started to get to where you have ChatGPT 3.5, then ChatGPT 4.0, but the O isn't a 0. The O stands for Omni because it's a multimodal model.
It's like
then they don't go.
It's like everyone looked at Bill Gates and was like, he's good at numbering stuff. Why don't we do what Windows did and just make no sense?
Exactly. And then it goes from that, where everybody's waiting for GPT-5 to come out, which there's rumblings that that's about to come out pretty soon, actually. But we go from that to the Reasoner model, which is O1. And then because there's a company named O2, which is the telco company in the UK, they don't name their next model O2. They jump to O3. And then you have O1 mini, O3 mini, O3 high. You have all the stuff that Google is coming out with Gemini 2.0 Flash and their different models. You have Google's deep research that came out a couple weeks ago. That's this, really big. It's pretty good at summarizing, tons and tons of sources, putting that together. But then OpenAI just released their version of deep research, and it has the same name. It's just not capitalized the same way.
Oh boy!
And then you have models from China like DeepSeek coming out, which DeepSeek may be actually the best AI name that's out there because it actually describes what it's doing. But everything is just getting deep all of a sudden in these naming conventions. You have the war between the U.S. and China right now with all these models. And the reason that we have deep research and O3 Mini from OpenAI dropping this week is a reaction to, I think, DeepSeek really pulling the rug out of the market last week. It's like everybody's just reactionary. There's no unifying principle between in any of the models where you could just like, I should be able to open ChatGPT, or I should be able to go to chat.com, which is kind of the new URL that they have for all of that. They paid like $18 million for it or something.
Oh, they got chat.com?
The guy that ran HubSpot or runs HubSpot bought that a few years ago. And then Sam Altman bought it a month and a half, 2 months ago. So if you go to chat.com now, that is essentially chat.openai.com, which was, ChatGPT and everything else. But if you're on, any of the paid plans, you're immediately presented with this dilemma of which model do I use? And I don't think that normal people are mentally equipped to make that decision. They don't know the difference between 4.0 and 01, 01 mini and 03 mini and 03 high. And sometimes they'll mention this one's better at coding, this one's better at writing. But should the person that is not an AI expert and not a developer have the burden of having to decide which is the most efficient model that's going to use all that token generation? And if you're worried about power consumption, decide which level of power consumption gets used? Or should you take like Anthropic's approach with their universal jailbreak thing that we just mentioned, and just build a little filter in between that says, oh, the user's intent with this question seems to be X, therefore the appropriate model to choose would be Y. I'm just going to pull from that, or maybe I'll ask a clarifying question first, and based on that, I'll know the appropriate model. I don't know why we've not gotten there yet.
I think we have a fundamental communication issue, and it's kind of been brewing for a long time. And the first thing that comes to my mind is the iPhoneification of a lot of technology, in that this like striving for the most simplistic, intuitive, like so easy a baby can use it kind of user interface. Somehow we became decoupled from like actually communicating how things work on a deeper level and trying to just present like a baby's first model to the public. But then when things get too complicated to be as abstracted as that, or are moving too quickly for them to be building better interfaces, or they're just not investing in better interfaces. I think that's what it is, yeah. It's a communications problem, I think. And that's also like in the reporting. AI is such a broad swath of technologies that all just kind of center around machine learning that can impact so many different things. And for the average person, their main interaction with it is it got shoved into an app that didn't have it before and it's not particularly useful. And then they hear about AI's boiling lakes or whatever because of the scaling race. And so then they assume that every ChatGPT query is doing it and so on. I think it's a communications issue.
On top of that, people know that there's value there, or they know that there should be value there. And so you end up like on LinkedIn and you have this help me rewrite this with AI button. And now every post that you read, or even the comments within the posts, feel like they're written by AI to me. I hear these very AI indicative phrases within everything. And so it makes me kind of write off people fairly quickly. Like when I see some of those phrases pop up, I'm like, that person didn't put the effort in, or they're disingenuous, or maybe they're using OpenAI's operator model to automate their responses to some of this. And it leads to a general cynicism as well. The other thing is, I think the AI arms race not only here in the U.S. with tech companies against themselves, but globally is causing a lot of confusion and consternation. And, U.S. versus China economically and from a geopolitical standpoint, we've been seeing that ramp up very heavily. People, I think, really felt it with the release of DeepSeek. But you and I had been talking about that, for over a year, because all the models for creativity, like image generation and video generation, like Kling and Minimax, and all those are Chinese models that have come out, and they've been better and potentially more successful because they've been able to train without a lot of the restrictions that companies in the U.S. have had to face, and frankly, because China may have a geopolitical interest in enabling disinformation and misinformation. So if they can release a model that lets you replicate political figures or do something without the constraints that a U.S.-based company might have, well, then they can create a little bit more geopolitical chaos.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that sucks is that you can't trust anyone to be doing this in the best interest of you or humanity, because they're not. And the arms race itself is the driver of the majority of the concerns when it comes to environmental issues and that sort of thing. It's a mess, and it's impossible to understand with any degree of nuance if your only exposure to it is either through headlines or through it being shoved into apps that you would use otherwise. It's impossible to learn about.
And I sympathize a little bit with the vendors that are creating this because, again, it's an arms race, and you may be trying to be really responsible in the creation of this, and then you see these big things happen because another company has decided just to lob something out there. You can't necessarily just sit back and say, well, we'll release our next thing a year from now.
Right.
You got to respond for that. And that leads to all these weird disconnected things that we're seeing.
I'm sure you've probably seen people online calling for like a pause on AI development and stuff like that. And that's so unrealistic because people will not agree to that like won't happen.
Right.
And it kind of sucks to feel powerless. But it's just like an inevitable fact that people are going to try and do the most unhinged thing possible that's in their best interest.
Yeah.
Because things are hostile.
And even when people call for a pause, so there was a call for a pause, like a year ago, and Elon Musk was one of the big signatories of that. Of course, he was also developing his own AI company at the same time. So you'll see a call for a pause and you kind of give it the side eye a little bit. And you're like, what's that person's agenda? Are they wanting everybody else to pause so they can catch up or surpass? And I think when everybody is giving everybody else in the world that's doing development on this the side eye a little bit rather than anything else, because we know that nobody wants to fall behind. If you're in that mutual distrust, then you're naturally on the path of creating technology that has the mutually assured destructive type of path.
Yeah.
So like we're going to build the biggest, best, most powerful thing that we can. And we know everybody else is probably going to be doing that too. And we're just going to get to the point where we have to figure out how to deal with it as a planet. Yeah.
We're treating it all as a zero trust, zero sum situation. And we're going to get the results of that if we keep doing that. And I don't personally see any other way that it could happen given just the society we live in.
I mean, on the bright side, though, we can create some pretty cool cat videos and fun memes with it.
Yeah.
And make things happen that have never happened before in reality. I was going through my Instagram feed the other day, and everything is cursed AI film strips right now, and they're fun to look at.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Man, I will not take us down another, I will not prolong our show because I see the timer has already hit 0 for this segment, but I will just say this is why it especially made me frustrated when I got blocked by someone on Reddit for suggesting that artists could use AI for creative things, because you have so little control over the world, and as an artist, it's not your job to fix it, but these applications have so much creative potential to make cool stuff. By virtue of the weird ways that they work. Creative misuse is one of the coolest ways to make art. My friend Alex takes apart old camcorders and toys and rewires bits of them to make crazy art that's so cool.
That's cool.
And so it sucks to not even see artists embracing any of it because of it's just a lack of nuance all the way around. I guess just for me, I get up in arms about artists because I like artists and am one. But
yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be interesting to see how AI companies figure this out, because presenting this to the world the right way is going to be a key to people embracing it. And right now we just see just about every AI company fall over themselves because they're just trying to have to keep up with the arms race. Mm-hmm. And in that, they're forgetting the people that they're trying to serve with this intelligence. And you'd also think that, and I'll end with this, the companies that are trying to create artificial general intelligence and spin up to potentially artificial super intelligence. So the people that are in charge of intelligence should be smart enough to figure out how to make an interface that people can figure out and a naming standard that people can figure out. And if they're not smart enough to do that, then I kind of feel like they're tilted over their skis a little bit too much at this point.
Or they're not acting in our best interest. There's also that. Yeah. Thoughtfully engaging is all we can do, right?
Yep. And then don't stick our head in the ground, right?
Yeah.
We do have to engage. We have to know what's out there. We have to keep up, because this stuff is progressing so fast that if you decide to unplug for 6 months, the world will have fundamentally changed around you. And then you'll look around and you're like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, I feel genuinely this will be a moment we look back on similar to the iPhone moment of like, well, a lot of stuff changed really quickly over a short span of time. So,
yep. And people talk about the feeling of technology vertigo or AI vertigo. And I think if listeners feel that, you are not alone.
Yeah.
People that are trying to keep up with this for a living cannot keep up. So we're doing our best to stay informed and bring what we think the high points and low points are to you. So thanks for being with us along the journey.
Yeah, thank you for sticking with us. And again, please write us an email, hello@eighthlayermedia.com. Leave us a voicemail, say hi.chat/fake. Join our Discord server and chat with us directly there. We want to hear from you. And we thanks for being on this ride with us as we try and do the best take we can about all of this stuff happening and keep it honest and just sort of factual. And
absolutely.
With that, I guess we'll see you next time. Keep it together, paperclips, and we'll catch you
later
next Friday.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Fake Files. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Tell your friends about the Fake Files. It's a great way to let people know you love them. Oh, and check the show notes. There's cool stuff in there, like links to the articles we covered today. Also links to our Discord server where you can hang out with other cool people who have great taste in podcasts. I say impeccable taste. And you can also leave us a voicemail. Yeah! So on behalf of Perry and Mason, thanks for listening.